In competitive Pokemon, there are certain familiar faces that I'm sure we are all aware of. Pokemon commonly used on competitive teams for multiple games in a row. Staples like Tyranitar, Heatran, and Ferrothorn, metagame defining for as long as we can remember. But there are other times where a Pokemon will be incredibly dominant and competitive for just one generation, a brief period of tremendous success before fading into irrelevance. Maybe it's because of big mechanical changes from game to game that negatively impacted the Pokemon, perhaps even direct nerfs to its stats, abilities, or moveset options. Whatever the reason for their falls from grace might be, these one-gen wonders are quite interesting to me, and they're part of what make individual generations stand out. Unique top-tier Pokemon that are only top-tier a single time in the franchise's history. Let's take a look at some examples of one-gen wonders from every single game in the series. But first, an important update. The high-ranking Horse Council elite, Calyrex Ice Rider, has now earned the respect and devotion of horses across the entire world, ever since he put on this immaculate Horse Council hoodie. Check out jimothycool.com and pick up some excellent Horse Council merchandise of your own to earn the respect of your peers. Thank you. In the Gen 1 competitive metagame, there is a clear contender for a one-gen wonder, and that is of course Tauros. In Gen 1, Tauros is the best Pokemon in all of OU. It is the perfect physical attacker for this particular metagame. In Generation 1, the normal type is actually an elite type, perhaps the best in the game, because they have access to all of the best physical attacks, and normal types are even immune to Body Slam paralysis, which is very relevant, as Body Slam is an incredibly common move in Gen 1. Normal types also don't really suffer from fighting type weakness because fighting type attacks are so terrible. So all around normal is an outstanding type to have, and Tauros is the perfect abuser of this type with access to Body Slam, which is an amazing move. Hyper Beam, which in Gen 1 is broken, bypassing the charge effect if it gets a KO, allowing it to be a great late game cleaning move. Tauros also has access to Blizzard, which is perfect coverage to hit your most common switch in Rhydon. Rhydon has that normal resistance, but it's very weak on the special side and very weak to Blizzard, which has a massive power and super effective damage against it. Even though you only have a 70 special stat, Blizzard is still going to hit extremely hard. And Earthquake is also an amazing move. It is to this day, just for simple reasons, a ground type attack, 100-100. And this of course hits Gengar, who is the one thing immune to normal in the metagame that just gets hit super effectively with that. So Tauros is just perfect for Gen 1. It is made to thrive in this environment, but this would very quickly shift. As from Gen 2 onwards, normal types suffered significantly, no longer the elite type they once were. Hyper Beam was nerfed, no longer having the effect of bypassing its own charge if it earns a KO. On top of this, Blizzard was even nerfed. The special stat was split in two, and Tauros doesn't hit hard with its mixed coverage anymore, really. And the Steel type was introduced, and it became one of the new best types in the game. And it of course resists normal, although Tauros still has that Earthquake coverage to hit Steel types, which is useful. Pokemon like Skarmory started to give Tauros a hard time. It no longer was able to bypass those checks. It no longer had the game-ending power of Hyper Beam, and Tauros fell down significantly. It is UUBL in Gen 2, rarely ever seen in competitive, and from then on it's just not very good, outclassed by many other normal type attackers. Although all normal types suffered after Gen 1, Tauros suffered more than its counterparts. Snorlax and Chansey both saw viability in other games, but Tauros went from the very top to almost the very bottom. It might be the most historic fall-off in competitive Pokemon history. Gen 2 is an interesting generation because there's a few Pokemon that really thrive and dominate in Gen 2 that you don't commonly see in other games. One of them is Nidoking. Nidoking is a fantastic Pokemon in Gen 2 OU with its great offensive move pool, not only with Stab Earthquake, but special attacking options like Ice Beam and Thunder and Fire Blast to threaten a wide array of different defensive Pokemon. Nidoking also has access to Lovely Kiss in Generation 2, a great sleep-inflicting move that makes it just that much more threatening and powerful. This is an option it would lose later. And Nidoking benefits from Generation 2's unique EV system. In Generation 2, you can actually max out every stat, where in Gen 3 Plus, this was changed. From Gen 3 onwards, you only have 2 stats you could possibly max out and less EVs to work with, but because you can max out every stat, it's less of a commitment to run special attacking coverage, and Nidoking benefits from this, not needing to invest in its own special attack stat with no cost associated with that, so it can just freely run mixed attacking options. That's something unique about Gen 2 that is sort of a buff to all mixed attackers in general, and running mixed attack fringe sets. Nidoking is one of the best Pokemon that exploits that. But I would still say Nidoking is not quite a one-gen wonder. I mean, later on it does receive Sheer Force, which is a significant buff, allowing it to take much more advantage of its offensive move pool and just deal more damage. And Nidoking has seen a little bit of OU viability because of that. It's still a fringe option. It's not that commonly seen, but I would still give Nidoking some respect for that. But I would actually say the biggest one-gen wonder in the Gen 2 OU metagame is Golem. Golem is a Gen 1 Pokemon that, in that metagame back in Gen 1, was completely outclassed by Rhydon. Rhydon has the same typing, better stats overall, is more well suited to Gen 1's metagame. But in Gen 2, Golem actually rose up to outrank its previous rival. Golem is the more desirable rock ground type of the metagame because of its access to Rapid Spin primarily. Rapid Spin is a fantastic new utility move introduced in Gen 2 that removes hazards from the field, and it's a fantastic thing to have on your team in a world where spikes are now something you have to worry about. The Golem has great utility. It has a pretty good matchup against Snorlax, the most common Pokemon in the format. And it has Explosion, which Rhydon does not have. This was an advantage Golem had to it last generation, but in this gen, Explosion is even more powerful, and it's another great point in Golem's favor. The Golem is very commonly seen in high-level Generation 2 play, and it's a fantastic choice to put on your team. It even has options like Roar to beat Curse. It has Fire Blast for special coverage to hit stuff like Forretress and Skarmory. Overall, great Pokemon, but this would be the only time Golem ever saw top-tier success. From here on out, Golem would be pretty terrible. Rock Ground would suffer with years as the times for Water Weakness and Grass Weakness would catch up to it. There's more Rapid Spinners being released that start to outclass Golem. There's just less of a reason to use this Pokemon at all, and in pretty much every other generation, it's not good. In Gen 1, it is okay, but very rarely used because Rhydon is just better. So I think Golem is a one-gen wonder. Only really great in Gen 2 and terrible elsewhere. In Generation 3 OU, you also have a couple of contenders for the title of One Gen Wonder. One of them would be Charizard. Charizard, the most iconic starter Pokemon in the whole franchise, and mascot of the series, and not a great Pokemon competitively for most of the franchise's history. In Gen 1 OU, you don't really see this thing. In Gen 2, it does have the Belly Drum set, which is okay, but I think that's a bit of a meme. In Gen 4, it's really suffering from Stealth Rock weakness. It has Solar Power, which has some value on some teams sometimes, but not really. However, in Gen 3, Charizard was just right. This was the time for Charizard to thrive, because this is where Fire Flying typing actually felt fantastic. There's no Stealth Rock yet. Stealth Rock doesn't exist. But Spikes exist, and Spikes can be snacked up to 3 layers now. In Gen 2, you can only set 1 layer of Spike. So Charizard is not only unthreatened by Stealth Rock, it's unthreatened by any hazards. It's immune to spikes, which is massive. Spike immunity is crucial in this generation, and Charizard's Fire Flying typing also has other benefits. It can switch in defensively against common enemies like Celebi, click and Grass Move, or even Metagross, click and Meteor Mash. It can come in on Will-O-Wisp and be immune to the burn. So Fire Flying typing has defensive and offensive application, and Charizard happens to be a great mixed attacker too that has coverage that threatens some of the most common Pokemon in the format. Fire Blast will deal massive damage to Skarmory, Metagross, Celebi, Breloom, Heracross, Forretress, and I'm sure there's more. HP Grass is great complementary coverage. Fire Grass go well together. That'll hit water types and most crucially of all, Swampert. And then Focus Punch is a perfect mixed option. It does have the drawback of failing if you take damage, but it has such high reward, and if Blissey or Tyranitar dare to come in to try to take your Fire Blasts, they will be severely punished. And this can be made safer by Substitute, as the Substitute will take damage for you, allowing you to freely use Focus Punch. So Charizard's Fire Grass fighting coverage combination here is fantastic, and it's a really potent mixed attacker. It can be in a Spikes abuser, forcing switches and racking up Spikes damage. It can be a mixed threat, self-sufficient on its own merits. You can even use Beat Up to really bully Blissey and hit them with their base defense stat, because Beat Up ignores all bonus stats in this generation. It's quite unique. But I would still probably say Charizard's Mega Forms count somewhat, and the Mega Forms are great in Gen 6 and 7. And it does have some use on Sun teams sometimes. So we can do better. There are more one-gen wonders in Generation 3 to speak of. What about Milotic? Melodic is a top tier Pokemon in Gen 3. It's a very strong OU staple, a fantastic mono water defensive Pokemon that is just really solid with its access to Recover, Refresh for curing status ailments, the ability Marvel Scale, which can come in handy sometimes. If you're statused, your defense receives a multiplier of 1.5x. Melodic is fantastic against enemy fire types like Moltres and Charizard, really shrugging off everything they can do. HP Grass won't really threaten Melodic very much. Melodic is also excellent against mixed threats like Tyranitar and Salamence with mixed coverage. Melodic is great into Metagross usually. It can hold its own against Dragon Dance Salamence, sometimes physical Tyranitar sets, enemy water types that lack electric coverage. Melodic is really great defensively. It's a staple on many defensive teams like those Stoli teams with Dugtrio and Skarmory and whatnot. But from Gen 3 onwards, Melodic would never reach OU status again. It would start to get outclassed by other bulky water types that gained new options like Scald and more defensive value and hazards and whatnot. So Melodic was kind of left behind by power creep from here on. It has some value in Gen 4 OU on certain teams, but it's not ranked OU there. It's not the common metagame presence that it is in Gen 3. So it's a unique Pokemon that you do see in Gen 3. But I think Gen 3's biggest Gen wonder would have to be Claydol. In Gen 3, this Pokemon debuted, and it is a fantastic Pokemon. It can fit on almost any kind of team. It's very versatile. It is a rapid spinner, which is crucial. Spikes dominate this format, and getting rid of them is massive. But Claydol is great because it has Stab Psychic, which threatens the most common rapid spin blocker, Gengar. It has Explosion, which is fantastic, allowing you to use it offensively, trade with things, be a bit proactive. It's got Stab Earthquake and pretty good defensive stats, and even Levitate, not only granting a ground immunity, which is always useful against most physical attackers who run ground coverage, but also allows you to ignore spikes damage. That's crucial. Because you're ground type, you're immune to Sandstorm. So much defensive value on Claydol. It can even help against enemy Tyranitar and Metagross with the Stab Earthquake, which is super effective. Just so good, so solid, so useful, so easy to fit on teams. Very commonly seen, the most popular rapid spinner in Gen 3. But Claydol would never reach such heights again. In Gen 3, it's top tier, it's a staple, it's fantastic. Gen 4 onwards, it's relegated to the lower tiers. It starts to get outclassed very quickly. It can no longer function as well as it did in the Gen 3 world as, I don't know, power level increases overall, higher power moves, more rapid spinners, more hazard removers existing to outclass it. And yeah, just the definition of a one gen wonder, really. Claydol would never achieve such heights again, and it is a very unique part of the Gen 3 metagame that you just don't see in other games. And I think it's a fun Pokemon to use and a good presence. I think it's got good amount of counterplay to it. It can be used in dynamic ways, sometimes aggressively, sometimes defensively. So one of the reasons to try out Gen 3 OU is because Claydol's there. It's kind of unique. You don't see Claydol every day. In Gen 4, there are also a couple contenders for the title of One Gen Wonder. And one of them could be Lucario. Lucario is technically also ranked OU in Gen 5, but I think this is an outdated ranking. Lucario is not a common presence in the modern Gen 5 metagame at all. It's a fringe pick at best, and then from then on, base Lucario is not great in any other generation. But in Gen 4, this Pokemon is very good and very scary. Lucario, a famous Pokemon from Generation 4 featured in Smash Brothers, a fighting steel type, with solid stats in both attack and special attack, an okay 90 speed. And what makes Lucario so threatening is its access to these priority moves. Swords Dance Extreme Speed is a great combo, and Lucario can be extremely scary in endgame situations where it can just clean up the remaining chipped down members of your team with its priority options. Extreme Speed with its high power, and Bullet Punch with its coverage and stab. Close Combat is also a fantastic new move introduced in Gen 4. Massive base power attack, perfectly accurate, that will be great for wall breaking purposes. Lucario greatly threatens anything slower than it pretty much with this massive attack that is so monstrously damaging. It's a perfect user of a Life Orb. Lucario also really appreciates the fact that it's a steel type and it's not taking Sandstorm damage, so mitigating the residual damage that other similar mixed threats would have trouble with. And speaking of mixed options, Lucario, with its attack and special attack being so high, can have a pretty diverse move pool with coverage on both sides of the offensive spectrum. That being said, though, the technicality of Lucario being ranked Gen 5 having some relevance in that metagame at some point, detracts from the 1 Gen Wonder status a bit, as does the Mega Lucario form, which is one of the strongest Megas in the whole series. Actually banned from OU play, and pretty good in Ubers with its access to adaptability and just massive offensive stats that make it really threatening. But I do think Lucario is a unique part of the Gen 4 OU metagame and a unique reason to play the metagame. You don't see Lucario have such a presence in other formats, at least base form Lucario. Another contender I would say is Roserade. Roserade is a great Pokemon in Gen 4. A new evolution for Roselia with obviously increased stats, a great sleep setter with access to sleep powder, its solid grass poison typing, and access to good hazards too with both spikes and toxic spikes up its sleeve. It has respectable special attack, making it a good utility Pokemon with a mix of status, hazards, and offensive damage output. It can have a pretty diverse amount of builds too. It's got a couple viable abilities, Poison Point and Natural Cure, both have their value. You can run bulkier Roserade sets with more hazards and Black Sludge, or you can go more aggressive with Sleep, Life Orb, and just high damage moves. And from Gen 4 onwards, Roserade is not OU anymore. It fell off. It's not a common presence. Peaked in its debut game of Gen 4 and never really had much relevance in OU from then on. Another contender for a 1 Gen Wonder, I would say, is Empoleon, a starter Pokemon from Gen 4. Once again, Empoleon in its debut game is excellent. With its Water Steel typing, which is great defensively, access to Stealth Rock, making it a good hazard setting lead or bulky hazard setter in the back pocket. Pretty diverse moveset options with options like Agility, Pataya Berry, Sweeper Empoleon, bulky special defensive Toxic Empoleon, Aqua Jet to take advantage of Torrent and have a physical option and priority option. You've got just pretty wide coverage options with Hydro Pump for Stab, Ice Beam, Grass Knot. Empoleon is good, it's diverse, it's immune to the sand, which is very relevant. It's pretty nice because of its defensive typing feeling so great. Doesn't feel hard to fit on teams at all, and in fact it can fill gaps very well because of its variety of options. But was never this good again. OU status in Gen 4, never a relevant presence ever again. Even after getting buffed in Gen 9, it wasn't enough for Empoleon to really maintain an OU position, and it did slip down a little bit from there. So I think that Empoleon and Roserade are probably equally valid for this generation as 1 Gen Wonders, staples of Gen 4 and never again. Generation 5 is an infamous metagame where permanent rain is everything. Permanent rain effects like Drizzle, Drought, Sandstorm, and Snow Warning have dominated this format since the beginning, in various different iterations through different movesets, and one of the most unique members of Gen 5 OU's metagame is Politoed. This would be the immediate thought for a 1 Gen Wonder in Gen 5. Politoed is not just good, it is metagame defining in Generation 5. With its ability Drizzle, which it received in Gen 5, this creates permanent rain on the field. This is Kyogre's ability on a little frog. It's a little bit crazy that this happens. Politoed, with its mono water typing, access to Scald, and useful utility like Encore, can actually function pretty well as a Pokemon on its own merits, even though it's not really impressive stats-wise. But the real reason to run it is, of course, Drizzle, which enables teammates with Rain synergy, activating abilities, buffing water-type attacks, enabling entire team strategies, entire existences. Politoed is definitive. That being said, Politoed does see some use elsewhere, sometimes in Gen 6. Pelipper doesn't have Drizzle yet, so even though Rain is no longer permanent in Gen 6, a significant mechanical change that nerfed all weather setters across the board, you still see Politoed Rain in Gen 6 sometimes. And I think you see it in doubles occasionally too, maybe, so I think that there are more unique Pokemon in Generation 5. We can do better. What about Thundurus Therian? One of the scariest rain abusers in Generation 5 with its access to that Stab Thunder, massive 145 special attack, great speed, Focus Blast to hit Tyranitar, your greatest rival on a rain team, good options like Agility and Nasty Plot to make you even scarier, even Volt Absorb, which is just so useful on a rain team. Obviously, you're so threatened by electric moves, so having electric immunity on a rain team is very valuable. One of the most offensively frightening threats in Gen 5, and then never OU ranked ever again. From Gen 6 onwards, you would rather run Zapdos on your team with its superior utility and options like immediate healing from Roost and Defog and stuff like that. Thunderous Therian really peaked in Gen 5 with Permanent Rain, which only exists in Gen 5 in OU, and then was never so good again. That being said, Thunderous Therian is usually ranked around UUBL, which is fairly respectable, and it does see occasional use in OU teams, more so than perhaps the next Pokemon here that I think is probably the biggest one-gen wonder, and that would be Tentacruel. Now, this is interesting because Tentacruel is technically ranked OU in Gen 4 by technicality, but I think that's a very outdated ranking that is not accurate at all. Tentacruel in Gen 4 is not great, in my opinion. It's rarely seen. It shouldn't really be ranked OU. I think that's incorrect. It's not really a prominent member of the metagame at all. But in Gen 5, Tentacruel is absolutely fantastic. In fact, it is one of the biggest reasons that you would want to run a Rain team. Tentacruel has the ability Rain Dish in Generation 5, which makes it fantastic in the Rain. If Rain Dance is active, this Pokemon heals an extra leftovers heal, basically, 1/16 of its health each turn. With Rain Dish and Black Sludge, you can stack up so much healing, and you can feel really invincible in the Rain. Scald helps, and also you have Rapid Spin, which is fantastic utility, of course, getting rid of Stealth Rock and Spikes and Toxic Spikes. You just get rid of Toxic Spikes by switching in as well, which is fantastic utility. And you just click Protect and Sub sometimes and just get that immediate, safe, reliable, constant chip heal that you are so frustrating for. On top of this, Tentacruel has great stats to take advantage of all this newfound power with access to Scald and Rain Dish and Permanent Weather for support. Fundamentally, you got pretty good traits too, with a high special defense stat, good base speed as well, allowing you to often outrun Excadrill and hit them, which is pretty significant. That's a common rock setter that you want to be able to hit with super effective damage in the Rain, which you absolutely do. And yeah, Tentacruel peaked massively in Gen 5. It is a staple of the format, and it's just never been fantastic anywhere else. This was the perfect storm for Tentacruel to thrive in Gen 5's unique world of Permanent Rain and Scald spam and all this stuff, and the stars never aligned for Tentacruel like that ever again, with Permanent Rain getting nerfed and not even having such synergy in any other generation. So I would say Tentacruel is Gen 5's biggest one-gen wonder, in my personal opinion. Gen 6 is an interesting one because you could give the status of one Gen Wonder to a Pokemon that is not actually officially ranked in OU. Cofagrigus right here is one of the most significant post-gen renaissances we have seen in competitive Pokemon, in my opinion. A Pokemon no one really used back in the day, partially because Mega Sableye used to be legal and other such things, but Cofagrigus has really risen up in the modern Gen 6 OU metagame as a pretty fantastic bulky ghost type, able to block Rapid Spin from enemies, which is still common. Even though Defog exists, it's still useful to block Rapid Spin. And it's a good Pokemon at doing so because it has great defensive stats, and it also matches up well into common enemies with its ability Mummy, which, if you make contact with this Pokemon, their ability changes to Mummy, effectively making their ability useless and disabling it. It's great against like Lopunny, who has Scrappy, which allows it to hit ghost types with normal and fighting moves. If they hit you once, they can't hit you anymore with their stab. So that's really significant. You can disable Pure Power and Huge Power from like a Azumarill and Mega Medicham as well, which is in cutting all of their damage output basically. And there's other useful applications for Mummy as well. And then Cofagrigus has Toxic Spikes randomly. Great tool, great way to make progress and set hazards. Pain Split for some healing. Hex and Will-O-Wisp combo. Will-O-Wisp is great, burning the enemy, permanently crippling them, making some residual damage progress. And Hex, double damage against status enemies to actually do a bit of damage too, and your special attack is decent. So Cofagrigus, it's ranked officially in RU because the tiering is frozen from back when Gen 6 is current, but many think it's like basically an OU Pokemon by modern standards. I mean, it's pretty commonly seen in the format. It's just a straight up member of Gen 6 OU that you got to consider these days if you're still playing that format. So you could give it to Cofagrigus even though it's not officially ranked here. It was never really great ever again. I mean, there's just more bulky ghosts. There's other Pokemon outclassing it from here on out, but in Gen 6, it's great. It fits well in the metagame. It walls common threats. It does its job. I also think probably Defog got more common from Gen 7 onwards with more good defensive Defog Pokemon. I think like in Gen 6, Excadrill is probably the most common hazard remover, so having a spin blocker feels a bit more valuable in Gen 6 than it does in other modern gens. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think that's correct. But yeah, Cofagrigus, great in Gen 6 OU, not great elsewhere. I think there's a other clear one-gen wonder in Gen 6, and that would be Talonflame, who in Gen 6 is pretty damn good. It was popular back in the early metagame of Gen 6. And that's because of its ability right here, Gale Wings, which is a really, really strong ability. Flying type moves have priority on them. So you just have priority Brave Bird, or here this runs Acrobatics with no item just to have a good, reliable attack with no drawback. Acrobatics, of course, has double power if you have no item. So that's just a 110 power priority physical attack, which is really good. You have Swords Dance, Will-O-Wisp, Roost has priority on it. That's a flying type move. You got priority Tailwind, which is good in doubles, of course. And Talonflame, post Gen 6, got significantly nerfed. Gale Wings no longer had this effect from Gen 6 onwards. Talonflame's Gale Wings can only activate the priority if you're at full HP. So significant nerf. Of course, you're going to be taking a lot of rock damage. You've got a lot of things threatening you on the way in. Being at full health is a lot to ask, and it really reduced the flexibility of this priority effect and just made it way worse to run Talonflame, honestly. So this one is, I would say, a pretty significant one-gen wonder because of a direct nerf to it, completely destroying what was once an outstanding ability. Gen 7 is a generation where this question of one-gen wonder perhaps doesn't have as clear of an answer as it has in the other generations. Tapu Bulu is ranked OU in Generation 7, a solid part of the metagame as the premier grassy terrain setter, the only one, with its grass fairy typing, high attack stat, and value on balanced teams, and even more offensive teams sometimes too. But in Gen 8, Tapu Bulu gets dethroned by the all-new Rillaboom, who then becomes the superior grassy terrain setter, outclassing Tapu Bulu. So you could call Tapu Bulu a one-gen wonder perhaps, but doesn't feel very fair. I mean, Tapu Bulu only exists for 2 generations. It's not as if this is a special case, and in the future it could easily be OU again, depending on what happens. I don't know. Perhaps you could give it to Celesteela as well, who is a great defensive steel flying type Pokemon in Generation 7. One of the Ultra Beasts with the Beast Boost ability and access to Leech Seed, which is fantastic on a Pokemon with such great defensive typing. Solid enough stats to take advantage of the typing as well. But in Generation 8, Corviknight is released, who is a serious form of competition for this Pokemon as another steel flying type with just better utility overall, access to Defog and U-Turn and immediate healing from Roost and other such things. And that's just more valuable than the unique trait Celesteela has to offer. I think in future games, if Celesteela did come back, it might still find itself outclassed by Corviknight and even having some competition from Skarmory as a steel flying type Pokemon. So you could call Celesteela a one-gen wonder, perhaps. Thriving in Gen 7's metagame, but unlikely to achieve those heights again if it existed in any other. I think another good contender could be Hawlucha. Hawlucha is an interesting Pokemon. A flying fighting type Pokemon with the ability Unburden. A great offensive ability, granting double speed on held item loss. So if you consume an item such as a berry or a focus sash or other such items with temporary effects that get consumed and can only be used once, you will get double speed. It's a fantastic offensive ability that synergizes well with Swords Dance and Acrobatics, which of course has double power if you have no item, which you're hoping to consume your item. Double crossover synergy there. And Hawlucha's stats are not that impressive, but Unburden is powerful enough to turn Hawlucha into a frightening sweeper. That being said, Gen 7 OU is the only format where Hawlucha is really a dominant and prominent force. Hawlucha exists in Gen 5, but it's not OU. Same deal with Gen 6. In the modern day, it's pretty good on Rillaboom teams, but not common enough to be OU. But in Gen 7, Hawlucha is quite excellent. This is partially because of the new seed items. These are consumable items that work in terrain, and there's different seeds for each terrain. They get consumed just if the terrain is active, so it's a very easy way to proc Unburden instantly just by switching in. All you need is for terrain to be there, and then they also provide you with a stat boost. Electric Seed here provides defense, gives you a bit of a safety net and a temporary boost to help you more reliably set up Swords Dance, which is what you really want to do to be able to sweep. So alongside Tapu Koko, who is in its own right a fantastic Pokemon, Hawlucha gets this incredible synergy and the most reliable way ever to proc its Unburden and just go in and sweep. This is just a great fit in the metagame overall. It's a very aggressive metagame with a lot of powerful and yet frail offensive Pokemon that can often get eaten alive by this Swords Dance Acrobatics unburdened monster. The Holuch is excellent in Gen 7 and really peaked here. The stars aligned for it, and it never saw such success again. The Tapus do exist in Gen 8, but Holucha is less of a good fit in the metagame. It's a bit of a slower metagame. Not as much room for a Pokemon like this to thrive as it does in Gen 7. I think this will probably be my pick for the biggest one-gen wonder contender of Gen 7. Fantastic in Gen 7 OU, and never as good again. I think Gen 8 is the gen where this question is most difficult. There really isn't a clear contender or one gen wonder in the same way as there is in other gens, in my opinion, for Gen 8. There are some Pokemon that only exist in Gen 8, but that hardly counts. They never got a chance to thrive elsewhere, did they? One contender could be Zeraora, who was released in Gen 7, but isn't very good there. It's UUBL, it's not commonly seen, despite its seeming advantages. It's got Volt Absorb, it's a mono-electric type. I mean, that's alright, but the real selling point is its fantastic speed stat. Great offensive stats for such a high speed stat, and a good electric type physical move. This is rare. This is much better than Wild Charge or Thunder Punch. 100, and enemy normal type attacks become electric type, so you can use this against someone using a normal type attack and be immune to them, because of course you're immune to electric type attacks. Zeraora has good coverage options, close combat, knockoff. It even has bulk up. It's got Volt Switch as well for pivoting. But in Gen 7, it's just a little bit outclassed by Tapu Koko. It doesn't find its speed tier being too relevant. But in Gen 8, that all changed. Zeraora's speed tier became much more relevant as it outruns and threatens Dragapult. It has the new heavy-duty boots item it can take advantage of, which is a fantastic choice. On a frail offensive threat like this, we quickly discovered that boots is great on Pokemon like this because it allows them to just come in more often and pose a threat and then get out with a hit-and-run type strategy. Hazards are a great way to counteract Pokemon like that. Think of Jolteon back in Gen 3. Jolteon is fast, very threatening to a lot of things, but it's stepping on those spikes every time it comes in. Imagine if Gen 3 Jolteon could be immune to spikes, then you have a really powerful Pokemon on your hands, and with Boots you can do exactly this. So Boots were a blanket buff to all Pokemon of Zeraora's genre, and certainly Zeraora benefited greatly from that. That being said, Zeraora does not exist in Gen 9. I think if it did, it would probably still have all these strengths and be quite good. So I don't know if you could count this as a one-gen wonder. Even though it's good in one gen, bad in the other, I think if it comes back, it'll probably be good again. It's got a lot going for it. Probably the greatest contender here, I think, would be Barraskewda. I would make the case for this one. This is a extremely fast and yet extremely frail Swift Swim offensive threat. It's kind of an interesting Pokemon because you'd think Swift Swim is an ability that makes up for a low speed stat. You can become really fast whether your base speed is good or not, because your speed is double in the rain, and that's the main benefit. Barraskewda having high base speed almost seems like a waste, because you're just too fast, and then the frailty becomes a problem. But Barraskewda is very good in Generation 8 on rain teams. It's ranked OU, in fact. The high speed is relevant against things like Dragapult and other high speed concepts like, I don't know, the occasional Unburden or enemy Swift Swim Pokemon or whatever. Barraskewda safely outruns like everything in the rain, you know, Scarf users, whatever. Another thing that's good about Barraskewda in Gen 8 is there's a lot of very good bulky teleport users to get this on the field safely. Teleport is a very safe way to pivot and get Pokemon like this in reliably to just pose a threat, and then it can hit and run with Flip Turn, which is rain boosted and deals significant damage while safely pivoting to something else that can take the hit or just keep up the pressure. So Gen 8 is an environment where Barraskewda can really thrive. And in Gen 9, Barraskewda does exist, and it's not really the Swift Swim Pokemon of choice. Rain in general is not great in Gen 9, but it's had its moments here and there. There was a time when Floatzel was actually a more preferable Swift Swim Pokemon because it is a bit more bulky and it has Wave Crash. Barraskewda is a bit more vulnerable to all the priority in Gen 9, and it's a little bit less of a Pokemon that you'd see in competitive play, and I imagine if this does return in future games that it will have similar struggles, and perhaps Gen 8 was the early gen where this could really be at its best. So I think this is probably the biggest contender here in Gen 8, but there isn't a clear one, to be honest. This assortment of Pokemon have all had their moments. There's Slowbro here, who is uniquely OU ranked in a modern game, but Slowbro has a pretty good career, to be honest. Gen 1 OU, viable. Pretty good in Gen 5 OU. OU ranked in Gen 6 as well, and comes up because of its access to Regenerator pretty often, so I wouldn't really count Slowbro either. Now here we are in the present day of Gen 9 OU, and there's a couple 1-gen wonders here, I would say, to be honest. Terra is a big game changer that makes certain Pokemon much better here than they've ever been. Moveset cuts and Pokemon cuts also have an impact, as certain Pokemon have risen up to fill gaps that others used to fill, and then now they're seeing prominence in competitive for the first time. One of these Pokemon is Primarina, the Gen 7 starter. Primarina, in its debut game, seems good on the surface. Water Fairy, fantastic typing. It's got a pretty good move pool. It's got solid enough stats, but Primarina has always been overshadowed by Tapu Fini, who also has a Water Fairy typing, but the superior Misty Surge ability, which has that fantastic status immunity effect that is so useful. And Primarina is also outclassed by Tapu Fini because Tapu Fini has Defog, which is incredible utility. So no real reason to use this bulky Water Fairy type over the much better one, but in Generation 9, the Tapus are nowhere to be seen. So there's Pokemon rising up to fill the void that they've left, and Primarina is one of them. Water Fairy is a fantastic typing, and now that there's no competition, Primarina is really excellent actually. It's a great Pokemon against Dragapult with its immunity to Dragon. It's great against all the Dark-type threats running around. It's generally a very good defensive typing against a lot of things. And Primarina can be built in many different directions. An Assault Vest set is good, as you have access to Flip Turn for pivoting, which is fantastic on an Assault Vest switch-in. You have Stab Moonblast, of course, always good, always reliable. Psychic Noise is a new option that allows you to prevent healing, and you can sometimes actually run Liquid Voice, which turns sound-based moves into water-type attacks, just so that Psychic Noise is water-type, allowing you a bit of moveset compression, so that you can fit this healing effect, anti-healing effect in, while also having a water stab option. That's actually quite an interesting way to use Primarina. Most sets run Torrent, though, just for the extra damage occasionally. And then you can run Calm Mind Primarina with Draining Kiss. Terra Steel is pretty nice to overcome your poison weakness and even gain immunity to the poison status ailment if you want. Primarina is at its best in Gen 9, and this might be a 1-gen wonder moment where Primarina is good and viable and prominent in the competitive format this time, and it never will be again. That's entirely possible. I mean, it does have the fantastic typing. I could see it being viable again in the future, but it really depends on the mechanics. It depends on the meta. It's very conditional. So we'll see if that comes to pass in the future, but definitely a contender here. And I think that you've also got to probably give it to Alomomola. Alomomola is a mono water type Pokemon with Regenerator. Regenerator is a fantastic ability, but Alomomola has always been outclassed and overshadowed by other similar Pokemon. There's a lot of water-type Pokemon with Regenerator, like Toxapex, Slowbro, etc., that kind of outclass Alomomola, and there's not much reason to use this particular one in most generations. It's never been OU before, but that all changed in Generation 9, where Toxapex actually got nerfed in this generation. It no longer has access to Scald, which was previously one of its best options, and Alomomola is one of the few things that kept Scald in its moveset. This is a move that was really restricted in its distribution this generation. Maybe that's an intentional choice or just a happy accident, because Scald has been a very powerful and arguably broken move for a long time. I think it's good that Scald is less prominent, but yeah, I mean, this is a big deal for Alomomola. This Pokemon also has Wish, which is a unique option on such a Pokemon, and it also gained Flip Turn for that fantastic pivoting move, which is so crucial on a Regenerator Pokemon and makes it so excellent as a defensive switch-in that can easily heal back the health with the Regenerator, the safest way to heal in the game, and just pivot to allies. With Boots, you're even harder to wear down as you're not even getting chipped by hazards, and the Wish Flip Turn combo is also amazing. You can Wish, click Flip Turn, take a hit for your ally, heal it back with Regenerator, and then heal them all the way up with Wish. It's just perfect, really. So Alomomola is fantastic in Gen 9, and this is the first time it has ever been so fantastic. It's never achieved OU status before. I think it occasionally sees use sometimes because, you know, Regenerator is fundamentally pretty strong. Sometimes you want the Wish support, but it's never been this good. It's never been this central and this powerful. So I think that Alomomola is a clear 1-gen wonder in Gen 9. But that being said, I mean, what if this is just a competitive staple now? What if this is the new Toxapex and every gen will see Alomomola return to the fray as the new premier water type Regenerator pivot? I don't know, that could be possible. So there you have it, folks. the one gen wonders of every gen. I did stretch it a little bit for some of the gens where there isn't a clear answer to this question, but hopefully you enjoyed my picks here. Is there anything I overlooked? Is there anything that you believe deserves a shout out or some acknowledgement from me that I didn't think of? Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you for watching. Who's your favorite of these one gen wonders? Mine would probably have to be Claydol. I've got the Gen 3 bias, but I think Claydol is really cool and so unique in Gen 3, and that's the only format where you ever see it, and I think that's pretty interesting. What about you though? Let me know down below, and thank you for watching.